My name is Angela Johnson, and this is my story. I grew up in a lower middle class family in North Philadelphia. I was the only house on the block who had a father. And my mother was a school teacher, and my father worked in the state for the state of Pennsylvania, and he was also a Vietnam vet. Um, what I can say about that is that my father was very strict, and it brought some feelings up within my spirit. We financially, my father was able to provide for me very well, but emotionally, there was a disconnect. Okay, so I didn't feel loved as a child. I felt totally ignored, and he also was very, very strict. As I became a teenager, I began to become very rebellious, and I began to also experiment with drugs and alcohol. So at this point right now, I'm tapping into that little girl who yearned for attention. And I began to fantasize about what I wanted my life to be like because I felt so alone as a child. My brother didn't come till years later. So there was some distance in between our relationship. We didn't grow up together. We weren't very close. As I stated earlier, my father was very, very rigid. My mother, as I became an adult, I realized that my mother was probably depressed. She didn't talk to me about puberty. She didn't talk to me about when I began to menstruate. My father did. And he became more and more overprotective. I used to actually catch him watching me play outside. And I was a little girl back then. Back then, 13, 14, and 15, we still played with baby dolls back then, you know. So, as I said earlier, I began to experiment with drugs and alcohol. And I also wanted to be accepted by my friends because I didn't find acceptance at home, with my family. So I did everything I could. I did a lot of people pleasing. Then it was finally time for me to have some freedom because I couldn't have male friends, I couldn't have phone calls. And I knew that something wasn't normal because my girlfriends were allowed to have boys call them or sit on the steps, with them. I couldn't have any of that. During the time that it was time for me to go on my prom, I prepared myself, but the person, my first boyfriend, he did not show up. And I didn't realize that it was going to become a very traumatic situation. So I ended up at the last minute having to take my uncle. And of course, my father had to take me to the prom. Afterwards, I was just in distraught and disbelief. I found my boyfriend and I ended up running away. I was forbidden to do anything like that. So I didn't tell my parents where I was, and they was very worried and concerned. So when I got home, my father said I had to leave his house because I was no longer following behind and abiding by his rules. When I left my parents' home, I basically felt alone. I felt isolated. I had just graduated from high school and I didn't have any direction in my life. Okay. My mother and my grandmother, they were great women, but they was about keeping their marriage together. They stayed married through all the trauma, everything that they went through, raising their children and everything. They kept their marriage solid. And I respected my mother for that. But I really needed her at the time, but she couldn't really be there for me because she didn't know how. I stumbled into drugs and alcohol because it was an escape for me. Someone introduced me to crack, and it was something to do because I didn't know what my purpose was in life. I didn't know who Angie was. I was in an adult body, but I didn't have any direction. As I continued to use drugs and alcohol and cocaine, of course, my life spiraled out of control. Okay. My parents were very worried about me during this time. They asked around in the community, asking people, did they see me? And they finally caught up with me. So my father used his state benefits and they put me in my first rehab. It was a wonderful experience. I felt different from other people. I felt unique. I felt like I didn't fit in anywhere. It was more like a vacation. You know, I did learn how to write then. I discovered that I liked journalism and I started writing. And I actually want to start, you know, to publish my own book. But anyway, that didn't last very long because when I came back out of the facility, I gravitated right back to people, places, and things. My comfort zone. You know, I was afraid to step out into life and be self sufficient by myself. Most of my cousins and the people around me, they didn't have the addictive personality that I had, you know. So I still wanted to hang out and be with them. And when we had events, I started drinking again because I said to myself, one or two drinks wouldn't hurt. But see, Angela never wanted to go home. You know, there was still something inside of me that the loneliness was a trigger and it's rooted in me from my childhood. And every time I get lonely, I feel like I have to escape that. I don't want to be by myself. I spent a lot of time by myself as a little girl in my room by myself. So I didn't want to be lonely, but I didn't know how that I was going to stay clean without these people that I was familiar with in my life. So I started using again. I did not have any kids, you know. Um, During that time, I was on birth control pill. All my mother said to me was, "This is not a license to have sex with everybody." That's all she said. She didn't talk about how I was going to feel. You know, I had cramps real bad. We didn't talk about using other prophylactics like condoms or other alternatives. We didn't have any of those conversations at all. So I became homeless because I decided to use crack again because it was euphoric and it took me outside of myself. I didn't have to look at me and I didn't know how to fix me. Nobody in my life, in my family, had been to therapy. So this was something new. With drugs and alcohol comes unmanageability, degradation, loss of control. You become unemployed. I became homeless. I had sex with partners and men that I would have never had if it hadn't been because of the direct use of drugs and alcohol. And for a long time, you know, I had to process my feelings about men because I felt that they had took advantage of me during that time. I got clean and I stayed clean for years. And I knew that I couldn't do drugs and alcohol again. And I had my first child. I had Shanice. I was 27 years old. Shanice was pretty long coming out. I think she was 8 pounds, 4 ounces, and she was about 16, 17 inches. My parents weren't delighted that I had my first child, but I did have my own place with her father. We didn't get married. I didn't think marriage was a really big deal. You know, I didn't really see the value in it during that time. At that time, I was trying to make something of myself. My father had got me a job, you know, early in life when I was still struggling with the state, but I didn't feel like that was for me. You know, it was working in retail at the state stores. I discovered that I had a lot of compassion for people and I wanted to do something where I can help other people. So I did. You know, I began to start a career in human service. During that time, I raised Shanice. Her and her father broke up because we had differences. And I felt that the relationship was just, it just wasn't working. So I ended the relationship and I became a single parent. So I began going to school and working simultaneously, putting Shanice in different daycare centers and things of that nature, and just try to continue on in my life to just discover who I am. And that was still an issue for me. You know, who am I? I know I'm a daughter. I know I'm a mother. I know I'm a cousin. But who is Angela? And I still had a big void inside me that it seemed like those things weren't fulfilling me. I relapsed. I started using drugs and alcohol again. By this time, my father was deceased. My father was killed. It was a homicide. We never found out who did it. My mother, I lost my mother too, but she was such a beautiful soul. And she told the news camera and the people, the press, when they came to interview us, she said that I forgive those men who killed my father. I mean, her husband, because she just wanted them to get some help. So that helped me and my brother to kind of start the process of forgiveness. During that time, I had gotten pregnant again. I wasn't ready to have another baby. So I had a back alley abortion. What I mean by back alley was there was a person in our community who was a doctor, but he wasn't practicing. And he gave me some pills. And he said that this would abort the baby for you. And it did, but I had so many problems after that. You know, I became sick. Um, I was in a lot of pain oftentimes. And so I had to continue to work and raise Shanice through all of this. And I did. Until 9 years later, I decided that I wanted to have another baby because it looked lonely with just Shanice. And I had another miscarriage again. And I had a miscarriage again. So I had 2 miscarriages before I was able to carry with my son. See, I didn't know anything about the pills that I was taking. I didn't know how that they was going to affect my body. You know, I didn't know how the drugs and alcohol was going to affect my body. The cigarette smoke, the trauma, everything that I had went through was affecting my body. Having sex with multiple partners, all that stuff affected my body. After I had DeMarcus, I decided that I wanted to finally, finish school. And God willing, in a couple of months, I'll have my bachelor's degree in business. But, it took about 20 years and it took several relapses. My last relapse was in 2013 when I lost my mother, my best friend. And I was devastated. And like I said earlier, I never really knew who I was. I was Dolores Johnson's daughter, you know, and I stayed in my environment. I was dependent on my mother emotionally, not just for the good cooking and the culture, going to church and everything with her. I was just dependent on her emotionally, like I needed her, but God had another plan, and I lost her. I lost my brick and I lost my mold. And I relapsed again. My life spiraled out of control. But this time when I got clean, it was different because I didn't have my mother. I didn't have the familiar people, places, and things to go back to. So I had to venture out on my own and discover who I really was. And I did that, through counseling, through therapy, through mentorship. I was able to discover Angela, who I am and what my purpose is. And I realized that, my higher power took me through those things so that he could create the person that I am now and maybe help or save someone else's life. Right now, for me, it's a call to action, to be brave, to tell my story, to help other women that's struggling, not just with drugs and alcohol, but with mental health and trauma. Because trauma is something that if you don't deal with, it's going to deal with you. And as I was speaking to Ms. Darby about, it's a generational pattern that comes from trauma. My daughter smokes marijuana today, and she can't really see how it affects her life because marijuana is legal. It's more acceptable than crack was, but I see the patterns. I couldn't really be the best parent that I wanted to be. I feel as though I didn't nurture her as good as I could have. Because after I got clean, it was about the get up. It was about taking care of her. I put her in sports, I put her in dance, I did different things with her, but I forgot to hug her sometimes, and just sit there and hold her. And now when she comes to hug me, it's not a whole hug, it's a partial hug. you know. Today I have found my niche in life. You know, I love my job. I love helping people. And I just try to be the best that I can be on any given day. I'm grateful for the people that I met in this journey, and I'm grateful for this organization. And I'm hoping that I'll be able to do some great things and make a difference in my community. Most of my rehabs were in Philadelphia, but so I moved to Delaware with family after I got clean. The closest person to me, other than my mother, which was a cousin, and I ended up becoming homeless living with her. Because, see, after I got clean, I became a different person. You know, I had confidence. And, you know, sometimes people help you, but they also want to control you. And they also want to remind you of your past. And that's what I experienced with my cousin. And she wasn't accustomed, you know, to me being confident and being assertive, you know. So I had to leave her house. So I became homeless in Delaware. And that's when I fell in love with the community and the resources that they had here. I moved into a shelter, a domestic violence shelter. And from there, I just tapped into all the 12-step programs. I tapped into organizations that helped out homeless women. And that's when I began to become a role model. After I came here and I had to become a homeless, clean, without the use of drugs and alcohol. I went to jail because of that incident with my cousin, clean, without the use of drugs and alcohol. So I've learned how to deal with conflict without the use of drugs and alcohol.
Was were you an addict during your first pregnancy with Shanice?
I didn't use drugs with Shanice. I did smoke cigarettes, you know, but I did not. I was clean. It seemed like I was clean during significant times in my life, you know. But after I had her, a few years later, I did started drinking again. Yeah.
And what are some of those services that you used in the state of Delaware? You talked about the community that you like so much. What was the community like?
Well, I went. Well, I went through an organization called Child Inc. And you know, when the representative picked up the phone, you know, and I told her that I was in crisis, she was just so encouraging. And she said, "Miss Johnson, we have a place for you." And she said, "Come." And I did. And I was empty. I was very empty, and I was still grieving. And the women there, they supported me, and they told me, they said, "You are not your past. You are enough, and you can make it." And they helped me to put one foot in front of the other and go out in the community and get a job. And that added confidence in my life. Also, I realized that in Delaware, it's a lot of philanthropy because when I went to certain events they had in the community, I seen people giving out free haircuts. I seen drives, um, organizations getting together to feed the community. One time, me and my friends, we actually went out and fed the homeless. I seen kitchens where you could go to every day and eat. Like no person that was on drugs or alcohol or whatever their situation was had to be hungry in Delaware because it was always a place, I think it's called the Emmanuel Center or something like that, where they can go and eat. You know, then they had the jazz concert, the jazz festival. And then before I got the place that I am now, I actually had to start off living in a room. And this was with other women with similarities, mental health, substance abuse issues like myself. And from that, I formed a bond. So I was able to tap into a lot of services in the community to help me.
Where was that room that you were staying?
There's a place called the Ministry of Caring, and it's a Catholic organization. The founder, his mother sent him here years ago. And he went back home and told his mother there was a disparity with women. So his houses house women in transition. And it's called the Ministry of Caring, and that is in Wilmington on 6th Street.
How did you find them?
I found them actually when I was in the shelter when I became homeless. I had to find somewhere else to go because the shelter had ran out funding for me. And I started doing a search and I found them. And the women, once again, they empowered me to pick myself up and get my life together.
What role did Child Inc. play in your recovery?
Child Inc. instilled self esteem, they instilled self confidence in me. I was very depressed, and basically, I didn't know what direction my life was going to go into. And the woman there told me, they gave me a lot of positive affirmations. They told me some of their stories. They shared with me their struggles. They told me that I can do it, I can make it. And I took it from there.
I have one quick question for you. Um, why do you think that, it's particularly women of color, has such a high rate or disparity of using drugs while they're pregnant?
I think it has a lot to do with the family. For one, the way the system is set up, it separates you from the male in the household. If you need food stamps, you can't say that the male lives with you, you know, and oftentimes, the family really doesn't have enough money to separate the male from the female. And in order for them to be able to qualify for certain benefits, they can't have any attachment to the male, you know? And when the male feels like they can't support the family, they end up leaving. And the woman is faced with a multitude, a plethora of challenges trying to raise a child by themselves, childcare, food, paying rent, and they're afraid to really tap into certain services because they don't want to affect the relationship with the male, and all those things become stressors. They become stressors, they become challenges, and using drugs and alcohol is a way out. It is really hard to raise children by yourself nowadays. And we need male figures in our lives for these children and for the mother. And I think that has a lot to do with it. The way systems are set up, it separates the family.
What advice would you give to other people who are currently struggling with substance use?
I would say that when you become sick and tired, that's when you'll begin to get an awakening about your situation in your life. It takes traumatic events sometimes. Some people have become homeless. Some people, life spiraled out of control. Some people did not have those experiences. They was just tired of the drug uses. But when you become beaten, you become willing. Look around you. Look at your circumstance and see, how drugs and alcohol have impacted your life. And you have to realize that it's not affecting you, but it's affecting everybody else around you. And you're tainting a relationship with your children. And there are environmental factors that tie into that cause your children to be succumb to that also. It's not just about you, it's about the other people that's going to come behind you and that you're going to help. But I would say get some help immediately because you deserve better than that. You are better than that. You are powerful. What you did is not you, it's not who you are. You can come up out of that. You can rise up out of that. All you need to know is that someone else came before you and did it. So I would say hope is available. Hope is out there. You have to believe in yourself. You have to believe that you can get through this and overcome this. I think my most rewarding aspect is maybe having the job that I have now, just to put a smile on someone else's face that's struggling with their mental health and mental illness, or who have had substance abuse issues and didn't realize that there was a way out. I am a beacon of light for people that have those struggles. I'm standing here and telling them that you can make it, you can do it. If I was able to get help, you can get help. And just being able to affect one person at my job is very rewarding.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.